Matthew of Bristol, a faithful representation of John Cabot's ship. She was built to commemorate 500 years since Cabot's historic voyage in 1497, when he sailed from Bristol to Newfoundland, now part of modern-day Canada. In the summer of 2022, and on the 525th anniversary of the original voyage, the modern Matthew celebrated her 25th birthday. The Matthew was the brainchild of Martin Huyton when he was Director of Arts at Bristol City Council. The project to build and sail her across the North Atlantic in 1997 was a private and public sector partnership, with most of the costs underwritten by Michael Slade's company, Helical Bar. The project was headed by St John Hartnell, who gathered around him a team to manage the various aspects of a momentous undertaking. As there are no plans of the medieval Matthew, the first task was to come up with a design for the modern representation. This job fell to Colin Moody, who was a renowned naval architect and historian. After detailed research, he produced more than 30 plans to be used by shipwrights. Under the direction of project manager Mike Blackwell, 13 experienced Bristol shipwrights were assembled to build the ship. Work started at Redcliffe Wharf in 1994, and altogether 26 oak trees were used in the building of the ship. But it wasn't all plain sailing. During the next 2 years, thousands of people came along to the visitor centre to see the shipwrights at work, including inquisitive students from nearby schools.
Pull! Pull! See there? Come on! Pull! OK, bring it forward.
Who's the oldest builder helping you build the boat?
Well, that's Mr. Williams, that is. He's 74 years old.
How long has he been building boats then?
60 years. He started when he was 15 in the docks here.
I name this ship Matthew. May God bless her and all who sail in her.
After checking for leaks, the shipwrights continued with the fitting out work until the Matthew was ready to leave Bristol Harbour for sea and crew trials. With the sea trials and crew selection now complete, in early May 1997, the Matthew and her 19 crew left Bristol, exactly 500 years after John Cabot left the city with his medieval crew. It was another momentous occasion, and Prince Philip, who was patron of the project, came along to help see the Matthew off.
And the sun blessed the occasion as the Prince boarded the Matthew and took the helm for the first stage of its journey. Just a short stretch to the Cumberland Basin, but a once-in-a-lifetime sight for the hundreds of spectators lining the route.
We have come to see the spectacle of the Matthew sailing from Bristol on the start of her voyage to Newfoundland.
The Duke steered the ship for most of the way, the crew taking over as it docked at Cumberland Basin. And this is where she'll stay overnight. Tomorrow it's the second stage of the voyage, stopping off at Avonmouth, with the highlight an unmissable photo opportunity as she passes under the landmark suspension bridge.
More people waving goodbye, and through she goes into the River Avon, and more gunfire and cannon fire. It's John Cabot would not have been looking downriver and looking up at the Clifton Suspension Bridge. Isambard Kingdom Brunel came many centuries later, and all those fine Georgian terraces, of course, went there when John Cabot set out in May to go down the River Avon looking for those new lands. Well, the weather had threatened to turn nasty, but stayed fine. It really was a beautiful sight. And there we are, one of the crew of rowers. There were 3 boats that would be towing 85 tons of Matthew down at least the start of her trip down the River Avon. We had a boat there from and Concord, of course, putting in a surprise appearance, a low-level fly past. Past all the people, of course, to wave the Matthew goodbye.
The crew it was reduced down to 2. It was myself and the captain's old dog. Oh, then the ship struck a rock. Oh, Lord, what a shock. It nearly tumbled over. She spun 9 times around, and the poor old dog was drowned. I'm the last of the Irish rovers, so fare thee well, my pretty little girl. I must sail away. Fare thee well, my pretty little girl.
After 54 days, the Matthew arrived at Bonavista to the sound of the folk group, the Irish Descendants. She was welcomed by tens of thousands of well-wishers, including Queen Elizabeth II, the Duke of Edinburgh, and the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. The Matthew visited 17 ports and harbours across Newfoundland and Labrador, and after spending the winter in Canada, she returned home to Bristol in 1998. Cared for today by the Matthew of Bristol Trust, the Matthew is one of the most iconic symbols of Bristol's age of exploration and its seafaring heritage. She's operated by a skipper and an extremely dedicated band of volunteers, without whom the ship couldn't function. We caught up with a few.
I have been involved with the Matthew for about 8-9 years now. It's one of the best things I've done, actually. I used to be at sea when I was 15. I ran away to sea, actually, so they tell me. So I was in the Merchant Navy for 23 years. When I was walking around the docks one day, I saw this vessel there. I came on board and asked if they wanted any volunteers. And they jumped at the chance because I'm ex-seaman. So I've been doing that ever since. So really enjoy it.
Mainly as a volunteer, what we're doing is explaining the history of the ship to the visitors. We do a lot of work with the schools, the older children doing the Tudors and the medieval history and the history of Cabot and the trip to Newfoundland. And with the younger children, we do pirate trips with them, and which are always a lot of fun. And do a bit of rope pulling, and quite often have a dressed-up pirate on here to entertain them with a bit of a pantomime. So it's a lot of fun, really.
Early each year before the season starts, the Matthew spends some time on the slip at Underfall Yard for routine maintenance and her annual safety inspection, as our skipper, Rick Wakeham, explains.
So we're out of the water on the patent slip down at Underfall Yard for our annual inspection. So she was hauled out down there, bottom washed, and then have a good poke around below the waterline. Normal sort of standard, find some rot. I think 2 planks needed replacing, which isn't too bad actually. I was happy enough with that. The ship has got an oak frame with softer wood planking, and the planks will go before the frames do, and that's good because it's a lot easier to put a new plank in than it would be a new frame, because you'd have to take the ship apart to get in there. The fact she comes out every year, you know, we're generally on top of that sort of stuff, you know.
Before the start of the 2022 season, and for the first time since the mast was made and fitted, it was removed for inspection and repair. This took place alongside Albion Dock. Volunteers helped to remove the rigging first, and then with the help of a crane, the 2-ton mast and the crow's nest were carefully removed for inspection. Afterwards, the opportunity was taken to move the Matthew into the historic Albion Dock. When safely positioned inside, volunteers set about painting the underside of the ship. With the underside being painted, the crow's nest also received a new lick of paint. Some rotten sections of the mast were replaced and revarnished. Bristol shipwrights took delivery of a single Scottish tree in 1995 and set about the task of forming it into the mast we see today. Shipwright Brian Cumby explained some of the steps in making the mast and preparing the keel to receive the 2-ton weight.
So the first job is to actually square it up. And you get it square and true. And in getting this shape in, we've gone off track somewhere. And I think it's on this face, and we're just checking it through. Until we get that absolutely more or less spot on, we want to attempt to 8-side it. Because once you've squared it, you 8-side it, then you 16-side it, then you 32-side it, and then you round it. And unless you've got these first stages more or less spot on, you'll end up with an elliptical mast rather than a round mast. You have a toe on the end of the mast, and it keys in here, and that holds the foot of the mast and stops it kicking. It's a Douglas fir tree anyway, and once it gets damp, it's going to swell. So you always allow a bit of freedom in here. Keep her coming. About a foot to go. Lower away, she's in the hole. Keep her going. Okay. She's home.
In a scene reminiscent of when the mast was first fitted in 1996, 26 years on, and the repaired mast was carefully lowered into place. With the mast in place, it was time to get the rigging back on. Ship shape and Bristol fashion, a new season was about to begin.
Ever since we come off of Underfall Yard, I know it's been non-stop really. I mean, nearly every day I've been down here varnishing, rubbing down, any rope work I needed doing. We've had to do that.
Making sure that all the safety equipment is in order, the life jackets and things, and doing a man overboard recovery and general safety things to make sure that we're okay with the public.
The pandemic was a challenging time for everyone, and our skipper talked about some of the impacts on the Matthew.
In the last 12 months, we've had a lot more time to do stuff we might not have bothered with, so we've been able to varnish more things and just take a bit more care in what we've been doing, rather than fighting against the clock all the time to get her ready for the first trips and everything else. So we just gone a bit above and beyond what we normally do, and the ship looks amazing for it. So I'm very, very happy and pleased and proud of that. And I've had a couple of guys who have stood by me through the whole time, and we've managed to work it out and get on with it, really.
Early evening cruises are very popular with visitors who enjoy taking in the sights and sounds of Bristol's historic harbour whilst tucking into a plate of tasty fish and chips. A not to be missed treat for groups like the Friends of Bristol Museums, Galleries and Archives. We soon catch a glimpse of the 1878 Fairbairn steam crane, the only surviving working example. Coming alongside the old Wapping dockyard site, we see more modern vessels, and with a drink in hand, we spot the old gasworks site. Nearing the SS Great Britain, we spoke to Karen Zold.
We belong to a local club which is associated with the museum, and we heard about this trip on the Matthew, and being Bristolians, we know that the Matthew sailed from Bristol across the Atlantic Ocean. One thing I have to say to you is, cannot believe a tiny ship like this literally sailed across a huge ocean and actually managed to get there and back again. It's incredible. It's absolutely just so beautiful to be on here, and we just wanted to sort of have a little slice of history. We wanted to come onto the ship and see what it was like. What would it have been like in that 15th century to have actually sailed on a ship like this?
As a volunteer, I do many things. So I serve in a bar, I meet people, I'm a guide, and sometimes I will do the ropes, the casting on, casting off, that sort of thing. And I also make items out of paracord and rope, little key rings, little bracelets and other items like mats, which I sometimes sell on the Matthew, because obviously the Matthew needs as much money as it can get, to survive, really.
One of the projects to mark the 25th anniversary of the Matthew involved the development of learning resources for secondary schools. The City of Bristol College helped to produce a series of lesson plans, with fashion students coming on board as part of their research into the making of medieval seafaring costumes.
Well, it's definitely made me think about fashion from the past and stuff, and just kind of methods of creating stuff from the past, where it's much less industrial and much more handcrafted, and you can see how we've progressed, and there are still lots of similarities in how we dress now compared to then.
Since we've had Rick on board, we actually do school trips, and they're usually 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds. And they're so receptive, they really are. And I'm amazed at the questions they ask. We do a lot of school trips, and it's great that we've got some students on today as well.
As well as helping out when the Matthew is on her berth near Emshed, the volunteers enjoy the trips along the Avon Gorge. These are always sold out, and we hopped on board and joined another excursion to Peel and back.
I was going around Bristol taking photographs, as I do. And I got to Redcliffe Quay and there were a row of concrete blocks in a line, which was rather intriguing, so I just kept an eye on them, and then there's a piece of wood on there, and the next thing I know there's the frame of a ship. So I just followed that up. I joined what was then the Matthew Society, that doesn't exist anymore. Got involved that way, got involved then when it was on sea trials and had to have some repair work done, and I went down for a weekend painting some of the boards from down below. Then when it came back, I came as a maintenance volunteer, because I was working shift work. I couldn't do what the other guys do and come every day of the week, the same day every week. So I started off for maintenance, and then 2 years after it came back, I went on a paying passage from Bristol to Portsmouth and learned how to sail her. And that was it. I've always been interested in the sea. My grandfather was the ship's captain on one of the Bristol ships.
My first involvement with the Matthew was when it was being built. As you probably know, it was down the other end of the harbour, down there on Redcliffe Wharf. And when it was being built, they had to have communication with the outside world. And I worked for the GPO in those days, and I ran all the telephone lines in to the ship so they could give and receive calls. So that was my initial involvement. Been quite interested over many, many years. And one day, about 9 years ago, I happened to be walking by, and one of the volunteers said, "You show an interest? You fancy going in for a volunteer?" I did. Next thing I know, I had an interview with young Anne here, and
I like the young bit.
And here I am.
On our way to the Cumberland Basin, we were reminded how Bristol's harbourside has become a mecca for water sports enthusiasts. On our way to the Avon Gorge, we waited in New Junction Lock for the Cumberland Basin swing bridge to open before being greeted by another group of young kayakers and paddleboarders. As we followed the Pride of Bristol that takes young people on sea training adventures, two of our own young passengers were looking forward to getting out onto the river.
We don't go into the river.
With the Plimsoll Bridge closing behind us, the crew secured the ship and we waited a short while before the water in the lock dropped to the same level as the river water. With the lock gates now open, we were on our way. We were soon out into the main channel of the tidal River Avon, and in no time at all had arrived under the Clifton Suspension Bridge. Always a spectacular sight, especially on the water and sailing beneath. We continued on our way and had a chance encounter with Phil Arkinstall, who's a history teacher at Harden Hewish School in Chippenham.
As a history teacher, I think this is a really important artefact for Bristol and the area. I teach about John Cabot, and when I said to the students I was coming on board the ship, it's just a real treat to be able to say that I feel like I'm part of history. I know the Matthew isn't with us anymore, and Cabot's story to some extent has been lost, I think, along the way. But when I teach about it in the classroom, one of the most important things for me is being able to talk about the fact that there is a real link here. Although Cabot's not English himself, the fact that John Cabot changed his name to sound more English is really interesting. But, travelling across in a ship like this, to actually now be on board it and to experience it is fantastic. I'm hoping to go back to the classroom, tell them all about it, encourage the kids to come back and see what it's like to be on board. It's amazing. And to imagine people being on here, in the late 1400s, travelling across the seas, not quite knowing where they're going, it's amazing. It's really amazing.
Now, a lot of people say, what's that big bit of wood for? I said, well, we have not got a steering wheel. So this is the 1400s. This is what they steered the ship with. It wasn't until maybe the 1600s that you actually got a steering wheel as you know it today. But they call this a whipstaff because if you're getting a high sea out in the ocean, this can actually whip you from side to side. In fact, we were in Bristol Channel going back a couple of years, and there was 3 of us hanging onto this to try and steady the ship up. And it was very difficult, believe me. It was. Yeah.
Another event to commemorate 25 years of the Matthew was held at the watershed. Members of the public, along with one of the original shipwrights and Matthew trustees and volunteers, shared their experiences and connections with the ship. Media students from the City of Bristol College recorded oral interviews for inclusion in the learning resources developed for Bristol secondary schools. Afterwards, we caught up with two of the participants. Roni Edwards was caught on camera on a yacht in the Avon Gorge on the day the Matthew left for Newfoundland in 1997.
We wanted to see the launch, a huge event, but we knew we'd never get into the harbour side. There were so many people there. So my friend, who has the boat, said, right, well, we'll go as far as we can without being arrested or whatever it was going to be. And we actually did come up to the Cumberland Basin, because although they tried to stop us, the harbour master obviously was trying to stop us. We'd turned the radio off, so we couldn't hear that. So we just carried on. I mean, what could they do, really? What could they do? And we watched it, and this storyboard, it was being watched by a friend, and he didn't know we were there, but he saw us, obviously. And a few weeks after sent me this storyboard, which I thought was so funny, and I can't part with it. I love it. I absolutely love it.
Waiting to greet the Matthew when she arrived in St John's Harbour in Newfoundland was Mary Regan and a party of students from St Bernadette's and St Bede's schools in Bristol.
We all went and saw the Matthew come in at St John's in Newfoundland, and it was the most marvellous sight because the ship, every ship in the harbour had its sort of bunting out and displayed. They were hooting their horns, and the Matthew sailed into St John's Harbour with a great huge iceberg at its side. And one of the children thought that was a sight he would never forget for the whole of his life. So when we got back and I was retiring, that became one of the proudest things I had done in my actual career.
So, 525 years ago today, the first Matthew set sail from somewhere in this harbour under the command of John Cabot, and went off to discover the Newfoundlands. Now, of course, at the time, Bristol was already a thriving harbour, but that voyage set Bristol up as the place, one of the key places for exploration to the west and to the New World, as it was called at the time. Bristol really was a place then that was pushing boundaries, and today it still is.
Back 25 years ago, I was a member of the John Cabot Society in Nova Scotia, preparing for the Cabot celebrations of the 500th year. And as a volunteer, I traveled here to Bristol to see the Matthew off on its original voyage, off to Newfoundlands. And when the Matthew arrived, first in Newfoundland to be greeted by the Queen, and then circumvented Newfoundland, it stopped back in St. John's, Newfoundland, where I, as a volunteer, joined the crew, where I met Rodney Mary North as well. And I sailed on the Matthew from Newfoundland to Cape Breton Island to Halifax, so approximately a couple of weeks on the vessel. Here we are to join the celebrations.
I know there is a huge team of crew, of trustees, of volunteers, of supporters, of fundraisers who keep this iconic ship going, and the award that stands in front of me there is fitting tribute to all of their efforts. So all of you here who are part of that team in any capacity, congratulations on this 25th anniversary. Thank you so much for what you do for our city, and here's to the next 525 years.